Hello everyone and welcome to Afrodo Reviews. On this channel I help you decide, is that book worth reading of a second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? You're ruining the dramatic moment. You're ruining the dramatic moment. Yes. I love you. That's what we're here to decide. Sometime last month, I uploaded a video talking about how I was going to read the most banned books of 2023. And I promise you, despite my erratic schedule uploading lately, I haven't forgotten. So today, we're going to be diving into the 10th You have to forgive me. I have been having a lot of coughing fits lately. Not sure why. Anyways, today we're diving into the 10th most banned book of 2023. Ellen Hopkins, Identical. Now, according to Pin.org's list, which is where I, got my current list of the most banned reads of 2023, this book has been banned over 22 times throughout the United States. The reason for the book being banned, at least according to the Manheim Township School District, who received an anonymous request for it to be banned on April 21st, is because the book exposes minors to pornographic and violent material. I'm not sure if I can actually say that, but, I'm going to leave it in since I'm talking about banned books. With graphic and obscene depictions of illicit sexual encounters in the text. In addition to that, from my own personal experience reading the book, it probably also been challenged on the fact that it has copious references to drug use, self-harm, and a lot of discussion of underage sex. To save myself some censoring time here. Hopkins doesn't really shy away from the worst aspects of the world in her writing, showing unflinchingly bleak and uncomfortable scenes throughout this book alone. So it makes some sense that this book gets challenged as much as it does. Does it make it right? Well, personally no, because I don't believe in banning books. But I can definitely see why this book has a lot of parents up in arms and uncomfortable with it. Since I looked it up and one of the sites I said it was supposed to be a young adult book, which the subject matter is pretty adult for a young adult, I guess. If we're considering 18 below. I mean, I guess above 18 doesn't really matter. In any case, kids aren't stupid. They can handle this kind of stuff. Also, considering the most common political party who often pushes for book bannings, I don't think it's gonna escape notice that the very awful parents of the main characters are on that side of the political debate, which might have something to do with it. But apart from that, let's talk about some of the more objective elements of this book. For example, this was Ellen Hopkins' 5th book in her writing lexicon, and was published on September 19th of 2008, and hit the New York Times bestseller list of the same year, as far as I could tell. Though, as James Patty's books will tell you, and my 2 reviews of his work so far, that's not an indication of quality to me anymore as much as it used to be. However, some small contradictions online claim that this book was actually published on August of 2008, was instead named the 5th most popular book for teens via the YALSA 2009 Teens Top 10 Award. So you'll notice I'll be skipping the report card for here because I'm not really covering this book in a traditional review format. I'm not talking about it as, this might be a book someone hasn't read, or this is a popular book, I wanted to see if it was good, or anything like that. I read it because it was banned, and I wanted to see why it was being banned. So, while I will structure this somewhat like a typical review, I'm going to skip the report card element of most of these banned books unless I feel it's deserved. So, with that being said, we're going to go on and move to the cover. Now, obviously, as you can see, the cover itself isn't much to write home about, admittedly. So it's just kind of a glossy cover with gritty writing and a disappearing shadow. I can't say it doesn't get the job done, considering the more bleak nature of this book. But in the end, there's not much to say about it. I think Hopkins wants the matter of the book to stand on its own rather than anything else. It might draw your attention, but because of how shiny it is. But I don't know. I don't know what else to say on it, I guess. It's a good question. But, what's the story about? Well, here's the synopsis on the back. Do twins begin in the womb, or in a better place? Kayleigh and Rayanne are identical down to the dimple. As daughters of a district court judge father and a politician mother, they are an all-American family on the surface. But behind the facade, each sister has her own dark secret. Kayleigh is the misplaced focus of Daddy's love. Rayanne sees Daddy's playing a game of favorites, which she's losing. Secrets like the ones the twins harbor are not meant to be kept from each other or anyone else. Pretty soon it's obvious that neither sister can handle it alone, and one must step up to save the other. But the question is, who? Now, my first impression of this book was admittedly mixed, to be completely honest with you. When I got this book in the mail, I was surprised about how thick it was. It's kind of like a regular old door stopper, you could say. I was apprehensive of the book due to its size, but I was also somewhat interested. This book was about an uncomfortable subject material and was about the relationship between two twins. So I was eager to see how this story of the twins on their own separate problems would come together to help each other out over the course of the book. With heavy subject material such as this, the bigger the length would give the author more time to properly approach the subject matter. And then I opened onto the first page. And to my disappointment, I found out that this entire book was written in a form of verse poetry. Now, this is well and good. But personally, to me, I've never been the biggest fan. I've never been the biggest poetry buff. And when I saw all this, I couldn't help but feel a little bit of my excitement at reading this book deflate. I mean, I still read it, obviously, but poetry was never really my thing. I find it hard to get super excited about poetry in the form of long verse poems like this, or long books of poetry like this. But that's my first impression. What do I think about this book after reading this? Well, let's go ahead and get started. And before I start, let me go ahead and put up a blanket spoiler warning. There's a massive twist in this book that, after I finished, I read online was considered a show-stopping levels of shocking to many people who wrote it. To many people who read it. I don't know why I said wrote. In addition, I want to put up following trigger warnings, as if the synopsis itself didn't warn you, as it is a tiny bit vague. Not vague enough, personally, but this book deals with some very adult subject matter and is unflinchingly brutal in how it portrays it. If any of the following subjects disturb you, you may want to just consider giving this video a skip and maybe even avoid the book. So, let's start off with something very clear. This is going to be... I'm spoiling the biggest twist of the book right now. So if you didn't believe my spoiler warning earlier, your last chance to get out. The twist that Rayanne was actually a split personality of Kayleigh, I'm going to say Kayleigh, is something I'm deeply mixed about. On one hand, I didn't like it because I felt it removes the dynamic I was really looking forward to when I picked up this book. That is, twin sisters who have to try and help the other one out before it's too late and their sibling is lost forever down the dark path both of them are currently walking. It could have been an interesting, showcase as the two try to help each other while also trying not to acknowledge their own faults or traumas. Reading that Rayanne was actually just the split personality the entire time not only removed the dynamic, but it also disappoints me to a great degree because the back of the book just kind of lies to me. A massive amount of emphasis is placed on the fact that they are twins who are currently going down dark paths. Not and they need to help each other, but I don't know. Maybe others won't find this as ruining of the dynamic. In fact, on my end, to put the other side of my mixed feelings, I legitimately don't think I would have liked Rayanne in the slightest if I didn't get this twist. I get the idea that both sisters were supposed to be heavily messed up with the various traumas that they've endured, but Rayanne was really hard to like from when she, from the perspective that is offered by the book, mind you, is watching her sister be honored by her father and becomes jealous that it isn't her being chosen by Daddy, or being chosen by Daddy. In the context that this is a physical sister who is watching this, it's disgusting and makes her really hard to sympathize with, since the basis of her problems is this misplaced envy and belief that Kaylee is I keep mixing them up. In this misplaced envy and belief that Kaylee is Daddy's favorite. But with the context of this twist, it at least makes some kind of sick sense, since it's Kaylee's own trauma manifesting itself in Rayanne's personality. It's not supposed... It's one of those... It doesn't make it too much better, but it at least contextualizes why they believe this, in a sense that you're like, now it's just messed up on the end that it's happening, as opposed to it's just messed up in every aspect. You know, it is so much. You know what? I'm just going to avoid trying to emphasize my feelings on this, since I can't word it right. And as for the twist itself, it was built up fine. To be honest with you, I actually figured it out by page 100, because I realized no one was actually interacting with Rayanne and Kaylee at the same time, and Kaylee doesn't seem surprised when a high school bully named Madison targets her in gym, despite the fact that Rayanne is the one who angers her and is the only one who has hostile interactions with her. Not even a passing acknowledgement that Kaylee figures Rayanne must have pissed her off, so Madison is taking her anger out on Kaylee. Just Kaylee treating it like something she expected to happen. It all kind of just made sense to me and was further reinforced the longer the story went on. I also know I mentioned this earlier, that I'm not the biggest fan of poetry books, but to be honest with you, the book has a almost faux poetry feel to it. Like, it's written with a bunch of poems, but they're not really poems. None of the poems I read were haikus. None of them had rhyming schemes. There was very little symbology in the lettering, with most things merely just spelled out for you, sometimes literally. At most, it's entirely free verse poetry, with the most exciting ones being similar to the reverse acrostic style, being a word in the stanza when the perspective changes, being a sentence in the stanza when the perspective changes as opposed to a word. It typically happens whenever the viewpoint shifts. Like here, as you can see, these lines spell their own little sentence between the switch, and often convey differing tones based on what that twin is thinking. Now, for the next issue I had with the book, this is obviously going to have to come with the prerequisite of me mentioning that I'm not an expert in mental trauma or many of the subjects within this book. By Ellen Hopkins' own words, at least some of this book was based on stories of people she knows. So by taking her at her word, there is kernels of truth in this book. That being said, this book feels a lot like trauma porn, for lack of a better word. The book, at times, feels like it's more interested in shocking you and making the reader uncomfortable more than anything else. Now, I'm not saying a lot of the subjects within this book don't need to be talked about, and by their very nature, they're shocking and uncomfortable. In fact, I think they do need to be talked about, and I'm glad this book does, because a conversation about these subjects is needed. It's why something like Big Mouth, even though I really don't like the show, I still appreciate it existing, because it talks about an uncomfortable subject matter and brings it to more public light in its own unique way. And ultimately, I guess that's where I fall when it comes to my opinion on this book. That although it's not something I could really say I enjoyed, I definitely can't say that I think it's at least worth reading once. And the discussions it creates on the subjects it's talking about are very important. The fact it doesn't really have a happy ending, with the father suffering no real consequences and the mother refusing to believe the abuse ever happened, is something that's sad, but unfortunately it's truer to reality than It's truer to the reality than I wish it was. In fact, I could probably spend 10 minutes online and five real-life stories very similar to the one in this book. So, when it comes to the subject of it being banned, yeah, obviously I really don't agree with it. I've made my point clear that I don't believe any book should really be banned. Even books that have, in my opinion, morally reprehensible subject matter is more of a case of, I think kids should just wait till they're more mature to look at it with a more mature viewing than reading it when they're at a vulnerable state of mind. I personally own several books that I don't agree with anything it says. Book banning is just something I don't agree with on principle alone, though, so pretending otherwise isn't going to work here. I can't, say, oh, is it going to go into the book ban volcano? Is it... So, yeah. The question is it worth reading? And, yeah, probably once. Like I said, it's good for starting a conversation on the subject. But in regards to a good standalone story, I really don't think it's worth a second or third read. Personally, I would give this book a 7 out of 10 if I was to apply a rating to it. It gets this rating because although the subject matter was really uncomfortable, the style of the book really threw me off from enjoying it as much as I wanted to, and because it did feel like it was going for shock over substance at a couple times, it was still a book trying to talk about an uncomfortable subject that needs to be talked about. It was in the same way that I rate Dear Martin high or Handmaid's Tale high, despite not actually enjoying the story of either of those books. The story isn't the point of the book. I do think, unlike those other two works, Identical is a little harder to read, and it's definitely not something that I'm going to recommend to everyone. The amount of trigger warnings alone I'd have to apply to this book is... But in the end, I don't agree with the banning, and I do think it is a book that should be read at least once by most people, even if I wouldn't fault you for never wanting to read it again afterwards. So that's ultimately where I stand on it. Actually, after reading this one, I'm a little more worried about the other books I have up there, Tricks and, Crank is over there somewhere. But yeah, I'm a little more worried about Tricks and Crank, the other Ellen Hopkins book on the most banned list of last year, because I've heard this one has one of the more hopeful endings, which is. I guess it shouldn't be shocking that I'm one of those people that prefers the happy ending to the, bleak, dark endings of various books. It's part of the reason I'm not a big fan of grim dark fantasy and so on, but or just dark fantasy. I made my point clear, I believe, in my Warhammer review about what I feel about dark fantasies and stuff, so I'm not going to go into it here. But in the end, the book Identical, it ultimately, like I said, worth a read at least once. Whether or not it should be banned is obviously a no. I can only repeat myself so many times. So with that being said, just remember, with every book comes an adventure, and every adventure is worth having, even the bad ones. See you later, everyone.